Can the justice system truly uphold the rule of law when, one side celebrates a conviction as accountability and the other side just screams lawfare and political revenge?
That really cuts straight to the core, doesn't it? It's this powerful contradiction shaping American politics right now. We're diving into, well, a staggering tale of two very high-profile indictments.
Yeah, exactly. We saw former President Trump's conviction, 34 felony counts, cheered by top Democrats. They said it proved nobody is above the law.
Right. But then, when former FBI Director James Comey was indicted on charges of allegedly lying to Congress and obstruction, those same leaders, they instantly condemned it.
Instantly, calling it malicious prosecution, a dangerous abuse of power. It's quite the turnaround.
It is. And the fundamental question for you listening to this is, what does this staggering double standard really reveal about the impartiality of our federal institutions, especially, the FBI?
We need to unpack that. Our sources, including analysis from Fox News, The Federalist, the Heritage Foundation, they give a pretty data-driven look at how these allegations of lawfare using the legal system for political ends are, well, actively eroding public trust.
And that erosion of trust, that's really our mission here, understanding not just what happened, but what these opposing reactions tell us about the maybe weaponization of the Department of Justice.
Okay, let's deconstruct this. It's fascinating and frankly alarming. Let's start with the tale of two narratives. The Trump conviction first.
Yeah, let's start there. The Democratic narrative frames this New York conviction as this huge victory for the idea that power doesn't mean immunity.
And the sources emphasize the process, right?
Exactly. They stress it was a state case decided by a jury of 12 citizens. It took 5 weeks of testimony, evidence, and crucially, a unanimous verdict on all 34 felony counts.
And the political message from leaders like Chuck Schumer was absolute. He said the big takeaway is nobody's above the law, including Donald Trump.
Right. And they push back hard on any conservative claims that the trial was rigged, calling that talk reckless, dangerous, and irresponsible. Basically, the system worked perfectly, in their view.
Okay, so hold that celebratory frame. Now, let's contrast it immediately with the reaction to James Comey's indictment for allegedly lying to Congress and obstruction.
The whiplash, as you said, is remarkable. Schumer, who just celebrated the rule of law, suddenly declared he had, and I quote, no faith in Trump's judicial system.
He claimed the whole process was turned into the president's own political fighter just for targeting opponents.
And Senators Mark Warner, Tim Kaine, they echoed that sharply. They called the charges against Comey a dangerous abuse of power, a malicious prosecution. The argument was even that replacing the prosecutor of the case was an attack on the rule of law itself.
So let me get this straight. Prosecuting your political opponent, proof the system works. Prosecuting their political ally, proof the system is broken and politicized.
That's the core contradiction, yes. And the sources, they point out the very real, tangible cost of this perceived political targeting.
You mean the money?
Yeah. Trump and his organizations reportedly had to pay out $76.7 million in legal fees over just 2 years, fighting what they called lawfare.
Wow, $76.7 million. That number alone shows that, regardless of how these things end, the process itself can be the punishment.
It really can be.
Okay, but let's look at the counter-argument here. President Trump's framing of the Comey indictment. This is where it gets, interesting. It takes on this almost moralistic tone.
That's right. When asked about it, Trump asserted it was about, quote, justice really, it's not revenge. He argued, you can't let this go on.
And he used pretty strong language, didn't he? Calling Comey a dirty cop who needed accountability for past actions.
Very strong language. And it wasn't just Trump saying this. The FBI director at the time, Kash Patel, a Trump appointee, framed the indictment as a necessary step toward full accountability. He talked about confronting corrupt leadership that had previously, quote, weaponized federal law enforcement.
So the suggestion is this wasn't about future politics, but about correcting past wrongs.
That's the argument. And to understand that claim of correction, you really have to connect the Comey indictment to these historic institutional failures, or at least perceived failures, that conservatives point to.
Okay, give us that context. What specific history are conservatives referencing when they demand this kind of accountability for someone like Comey?
Well, first, there's Crossfire Hurricane. That was the FBI's internal code name for the counterintelligence investigation into the Trump campaign back in 2016. Comey was key in launching that.
And that investigation was tied to the Steele dossier, right?
Exactly. An effort fueled, conservatives argue, by the now widely discredited Steele dossier, a document they say was filled with frivolous and unsubstantiated claims. The core argument is that a partisan political effort was launched based on opposition research, not solid intelligence.
And this connects to the double standard argument again, contrasting the Trump investigation with how Hillary Clinton was treated in 2016.
Precisely. Conservatives point to Comey's very public unilateral decision not to recommend prosecution for her handling of classified emails. They see that as a clear overstep.
Like the FBI director acting as judge and jury.
That's the perception on the right, yeah. Deciding immunity for a top political figure before charges were even considered by prosecutors.
And the concerns didn't stop in 2016, did they? Conservatives also point towards the 2020 election.
Right. The FBI apparently warned social media platforms about potential Russian disinformation right before the election. This led directly to the suppression of the New York Post's story on the Hunter Biden laptop.
But the twist, according to the sources.
The big twist is that our sources reveal the FBI had reportedly determined the laptop's contents were true and authentic months before that warning went out. Yet they let the disinformation narrative run, effectively suppressing a potentially damaging story weeks before an election.
So when conservatives talk about systemic corruption, they see indicting Comey as holding someone accountable for years of these perceived abuses, from the dossier to election interference.
That's the framing. It's presented not as mirroring lawfare, but as finally enforcing accountability for weaponizing federal institutions against political opponents. That's the political motivation presented.
Okay, so that's the motivation. But if the goal is clean justice, the next crucial question you have to ask is, was the process itself clean? And well, this is where our sources reveal some really complex, maybe alarming wrinkles. It kind of undermines that claim of pure justice.
Yeah, this is arguably the most complex piece. Even some conservative legal commentators question the quality of the actual case against Comey. One editor at The Federalist argued the indictment was, quote, deeply flawed, ill-conceived, and incompetently drafted.
Suggesting it should have been thrown out before even getting to trial.
Essentially, yes. Saying there was, quote, no factual basis for a perjury charge. That's a pretty strong critique coming from a friendly publication.
It is. It suggests procedural sloppiness, maybe? But the really critical detail, the one about procedural damage, seems to be the high-level interference that apparently pushed the case forward, even with internal doubt.
Absolutely. And this involves John Durham. He was the Trump-appointed special counsel tasked with investigating the origins of the whole Russiagate probe.
What did Durham find?
Or not find? Well, according to the reports cited in our sources, Durham informed prosecutors that he was, quote, unable to uncover evidence to support charges of false statements or obstruction against Comey.
Wait a second. A special counsel, appointed specifically to look for this kind of misconduct, says the evidence isn't there. But the Department of Justice went ahead with the indictment anyway.
That's what the sources indicate happened. And the way they moved it forward allegedly involved some highly unusual personnel changes. The U.S. attorney overseeing the case, Eric Siebert, was reportedly effectively fired after he told the administration that charges against Comey would be, quote, unlikely to hold water.
Removing a prosecutor who's skeptical of the case, I mean, that's a huge red flag for the rule of law, isn't it? What happened next?
Siebert was replaced by Lindsay Halligan. Now, the sources point out she was a former member of Trump's personal legal defense team.
Okay.
And critically, had zero prosecutorial experience. Apparently only civil cases before that. On top of that, career prosecutors in Virginia reportedly wouldn't touch it, forcing the administration to bring in prosecutors from North Carolina to actually run the case.
Wow. Okay, let's just pause on that. Regardless of whether someone thinks Comey deserved indictment, the process described here, ignoring Durham, firing a skeptical U.S. attorney, installing a partisan loyalist with no relevant experience, having to import lawyers, it makes the whole thing look intensely political.
It really does. It undermines the justice, really, argument and gives a lot of ammunition to the other side crying lawfare. When you see that kind of political maneuvering needed just to bring the indictment, well, it looks less like an orderly system and more like a targeted campaign.
Which brings us directly to the bigger danger here, this idea of systemic weaponization and the maybe urgent need for structural reform.
Exactly. The sources really emphasize that this cycle, this tit-for-tat, creates an environment where even Justice Department staff worry they're working in a politicized agency environment, not one based on impartial justice. And the distrust goes way beyond just the Comey situation.
So let's zoom out. Look at the broader pattern of alleged FBI overreach that the sources document. It's not just about high-profile political figures, is it?
No, not at all. The sources detail some pretty serious alleged abuse of intelligence tools that could impact everyday Americans. For instance, the FBI improperly queried the FISA Section 702 database, that massive foreign intelligence tool.
Over 278,000 times.
Yeah, more than 278,000 times, an astonishing number.
And who are they querying? Not just foreign terrorists, presumably?
Apparently not. The list cited is shocking. Crime victims, people arrested related to January 6th, Black Lives Matter arrestees, and maybe most incredibly, 19,000 donors to a single congressional candidate.
19,000 donors using a foreign intelligence tool. That raises huge questions about domestic surveillance for political purposes.
It certainly does. And then there's the issue of priorities. The agency reportedly shifted resources to investigate parents protesting at school board meetings, labeling that as potential domestic terrorism.
While also focusing on arresting pro-life protesters.
Right. And at the same time, reportedly ignoring the massive crisis of 85,000 missing migrant children, many feared to be victims of trafficking. The priorities seem, well, skewed, according to these reports.
So this whole pattern leads conservatives to argue that we need immediate, maybe even radical structural changes to rein in what they see as an unaccountable agency.
That's the conclusion they draw, yes.
Okay, so what are the specific structural fixes being proposed? What do conservatives want to change to, protect liberties?
The Heritage Foundation analysis highlights three major reforms. First, prohibit the FBI from querying that Section 702 database on its own. They want much stronger oversight, warrants required.
Makes sense given the numbers you cited. What else?
Second, end the FBI's ability to monitor Americans using these preliminary investigations called assessments without any actual factual basis or evidence that a crime might be occurring.
Okay. And the third one, this connects back to Comey, right?
It does. It's the proposal to repeal the 10-year term of office for the FBI director. The thinking is this would ensure stronger accountability to the president, making the director more responsive to the elected administration, whoever that may be.
So wrapping this up, we've seen these starkly conflicting narratives around two major indictments. It really exposes a deep crisis of confidence in the impartiality of our justice system.
It really does. When leaders on both sides are accusing their opponents of weaponizing the law, and frankly, both sides seem to have some evidence to point to, then the rule of law itself ends up being the casualty.
Absolutely. And that proposed reform, repealing the FBI director's 10-year term, it's meant to increase accountability, right?
That's the goal, yes. Make them more accountable to the president.
But doesn't that just make the FBI director potentially the next target for politically motivated removal? An even easier target, perhaps?
That's the potential downside, the counterargument. Does it solve the problem or just shift it?
Or maybe is a lack of that direct accountability the reason the FBI felt it could ignore findings like Durham's or overlook evidence of past issues in the first place? It leaves us with a really unsettling thought, doesn't it? How do you fix a system when the only apparent way to hold your political enemies accountable seems to involve mirroring their own alleged abuses? You risk institutionalizing the very weaponization you wanted to stop.
A tough knot to untangle.
Definitely something for you to mull over, or maybe explore more on your own.